So that said, we are live, and I would like to welcome everybody to today's webinar entitled Content Strategy and Localization of Yahoo's Help Content. Actually, I met Todd of Yahoo at a conference in the Silicon Valley not too long ago, I think back in October. And we had a great presentation, great chat about what you do, and I was like fascinated by it. So we invited you to tell your story today. That said, Chris, I'm super happy to have you with us today. Chris, why don't you introduce yourself, and then also David.
All right, thanks, Chris. I'm Chris Todd with Yahoo in their customer experience organization, and I have been working in content and knowledge management for the better part of 15 years. And so today I'll share some of that experience in my strategy.
Great.
David?
I'm David Sommer, the Director of Strategic Operations for Net-Translators. I'm in my 11th year with Net-Translators. My function today is essentially to bridge between what operations does and what sales can provide to the customer.
Awesome. Chris, if you want to go to the next slide. Beautiful. And actually,
alrighty,
why don't let's get started. And I'll probably do a poll after this first slide so we know a little bit more about our audience. Chris?
All right, thank you. So I won't spend a lot of time about Yahoo. Hopefully all of you on the phone and on the webinar know all about Yahoo already. So we'll just look at this one slide, and you can take it from here in terms of if you want to learn more about Yahoo. So let me go into my organization, and then Chris, if you want to run your poll after this.
Okay.
In help content here at Yahoo, we're still serving millions of customers every month. If you think about Yahoo, we have properties across the globe, and so therefore we have millions of visitors who are also seeking help. My particular organization, we're providing help to support all these properties, and the pictures here are trying to show you why we have help in the desktop for browser users. We have help on our mobile platform. We have help in product, and then we have help that we also provide for agents who are supporting customers. So it's lots of different types of users seeking help.
Great. Let's actually learn, let's do one poll here where we learn about our audience, and I'm going to start that poll. You can let us know if you currently work on the customer side, if we have vendors here with us today, freelance linguist, or an analyst or industry consultant. Something else. I think I checked the registration list. We had most of you guys are probably from the customer side interested in learning how to manage what Chris is talking about today. Let's take another 3 seconds, if you could please cast your vote, and then I'll share the results. Okay, and I'm going to close it right now, and I will share the results. So Chris, we have a lot of people from the customer side, some vendors, freelancers, analysts, and some others. I'm going to hide that. Okay, there we go. It's all yours.
All right, thanks. So there we go. So when we talk about strategy, everybody has their own definition of strategy. And so I got some examples here for us to ponder for a moment. Christina and Jeffrey are recognized people in the space. Then I got Usability Gov here as well. So you can see in terms of content, they're talking about creation, publication, governance. That's Christina. You know, usability.gov, they're talking about planning, creation, delivery, governance again. Jeffrey addressed the specific purpose, form, and development of content assets. So, you know, strategy is a tough one to define for all of us, because strategy really encompasses everything we do and in fact everything you choose not to do. That's a strategy. In fact, if you have no strategy, actually that's a strategy. Maybe you're just going to be very tactical. You're going to go by the seat of your pants. That's a strategy. So just a little bit about strategy. And you can think about what's your strategy. It could be investment. How much are you going to spend in a particular part of your organization? In this case, I'm talking about help content, but it can be platform. How much you can invest in a platform? What platform you're going to choose? Your translation and localization, that is going to fit in your strategy. Your writing style, your voice, process and governance, what you're going to share publicly versus you hold, internally. Your hiring practices, all those things can be part of your strategy, and of course there's much more. So hopefully that's a little bit to get you going thinking about strategy. Where I started with is kind of what is my desired outcomes? So in my case, I want all of my customers to self-resolve issues effectively. And of course, effectively in itself can be determined. What does that really mean? So we want timely, relevant, concise information and a consistent brand voice. So that's kind of our outcomes. So that's what we're trying to achieve when we talk about our strategy. And so what I put together for you today is I'll reference 5 anchors. So that's the core of our strategy. And then part of the execution side is I'll talk about these 10 content principles, so we really get into the meat of the content and what I do there. To start with, my first anchor is write once, use everywhere. And this, if I had to pick one thing in my strategy, this is the most important. So when we talk about translation and localization, it comes out of this, write once, use everywhere. Again, it's the core to everything I do. And as you'll see through my presentation, I don't always call out translation and localization specifically because it's in the core of everything we do. When we do our work, we think about it every day. It's not because I'm based in the U.S. Everything is going to focus on the U.S. and English speakers. In fact, everything that we do has to be able to be translated and localized for my customers throughout the world. So write once, use everywhere. That means consumers, partners, and Yahoo agents. So every customer. And then also it's on every device. So that customer could access my help content through the desktop, through mobile, in product. And of course my agents I showed you before, currently they're all using desktop. And then also in every locale. So whether my customer is in the US, whether they're in Brazil, whether they're in South Africa, every locale. And so again, every customer, every device, and every locale. And so one of the things I talk about when I work with my organization here is if the content was important enough for my English-speaking customers, isn't it also important enough for my customers everywhere else throughout the world? So in a space of developing help content, I'm doing research. I'm finding out what are the big issues. I'm capturing that. If I'm going through all that effort to make it available to my English-speaking customers, why aren't I also making it available to everybody else? And so that's kind of my argument in terms of everywhere, including all these different locales. We've done the hard work, which is capture the content. Make sure it's also available everywhere. And so how do I go about and do this? So in my mind, this is simple because I've done this now quite a while. But not everybody, of course, has done this. So we master everything in English US, and then we'll outsource it to a group such as David's group. And when it comes back, we will have parent languages. So in this example here, I have, of course, my EN US, so really that didn't go anywhere. I have Spanish, I got French, and then I will make that available into all my English locales, and all my Spanish locales, all my French locales, etc., all 14 parent languages, and then I'll use what we call tokens or replacement variables, so I can localize certain portions of that content. So as an example, a URL or an address or a phone number. Now, David, I think maybe you had something you could add here in terms of what it looks like from your side.
Yeah. Well, the first thing, for us as a translation provider, it's good to know that that Chris, you have, you've got it spot on. You understand that localization is much more than just the translation side. That you really do have to worry about your locales and make it relevant for each locale. And in today's world, a locale is can be a virtual locale as well as a physical locale. So, in terms of a type of virtual locale, well, obviously French Canadian is, spoken mostly up in Quebec, but there are other pockets of French-speaking Canadians up in Manitoba, also in Vancouver. In fact, there's also some. So, making it right for the locale is really a big effort. U.S. Spanish, for instance, could be different flavors depending on the geographic region. So, the type of investment in terms of time and effort to make it right for these locales across languages is quite impressive. We treat when we do a localization from English to other English, India, Australia, UK, whatever, we treat it as unique language because we understand that beyond spelling differences and there are different types of words that that need to be communicated. From personal experience, I years and years and years ago, I dated a girl from London, and she thought it was the funniest thing in the world that I had a cousin named Randy, and I didn't understand why at the time.
Right.
So, it's good to know that your content is sensitive enough for each of those locales.
Great. So thank you for that. And so again, for everybody, just to remind you, in my organization, everything we do is built into this notion of we're going to master in one language, but we're going to make it available to 14 parent languages and then 24 different additional children, so 38 locales in total. And so some of the message that I deliver further on, you may not see it explicitly called out. It's because that's part of our DNA at this point. I've been working here at Yahoo for 3 years, and this is just the message that we talk about day in and day out. We're not U.S.-centric or choose your country. We're global, and we have to think that way and act that way. And it's part of my mission every day as I work with my colleagues who may forget that to remind them.
Actually,
it has
Chris,
to be part of that DNA.
Chris, I got a quick question.
Yes.
Is your localization team localized in one place, or did you work with teams all over the world?
That's a great question. Actually, they are located throughout the world as well.
Ah, okay.
So while we may work with someone locally or in one location, part of their sourcing of expertise, they have people throughout the world.
Okay, great. And actually, I would like to encourage our audience, if you already have questions, please submit them now through the Q&A or chat interface, and we'll get to the questions at the end of the presentation. All right, Chris, go ahead.
Excellent. So the next part of this anchor is the writer, or my analyst is the hub to everything. And so I'll let the screen draw here, but my writer, who is responsible for my content, they interact with all these different groups, whether it's our product teams, working with our product support manager, whether it's rich media, legal, and again with our translation and localization as we're talking about here today. They are the center of the world when it comes to all the content. And so we haven't divided this to distributed people, because then it broke the experience. Instead, my writer may write for fewer things, but they own that whole experience. And so I think of them as a super writer, and these are some of the skills or hats they wear every day. So they're writer and editor. They have to be a project manager. They have to be an effective communicator. They have to be a good information designer. They have to know how to present this information so it can be consumed. They're really Yahoo's globalization expert, when it comes to content. And then finally, they have to be a data analyst, so they have to be able to make sense of data to know how to make changes and improvements, etc. And then the third one is having this analysis cadence. So part of them being those that analyst expert is they have to have some level of cadence. And so there's a list of things I got listed here. I'll go into a few of them. They can look at top used articles, so to make sure the big head of our traffic, that content is very reflective of, easy to read, solving the problem, etc. And I'll go more into that detail when we talk about principles. But they also look at things like least used articles. So we have a process called FRAC. And what FRAC does is we look at things that are not being used and should it be retired, maybe it was written poorly, needs to be corrected, maybe it's not showing up in search results. So FRAC helps us address that, which kind of speaks to this article's not updated. That's part of it. If articles aren't getting updated, has that feature no longer part of the product and no one informed us and we missed that boat, or is it simply not an important piece of information, we get rid of it? Then article performance. We actually categorize our articles by their intent. And so one intent may be to solve a problem, another intent may be to give you an overview of how the product works. And so that performance for that article or that expectation is going to be different. Think of a conversion in a shopping cart. Our conversion metrics are going to be different from an article that is designed to solve a problem versus that conversion to teach someone about that product and get them really engaged. Of course, search data is a big one, and then regional outliers. We need to look at that. Again, if we're going to think globally, we need to be cognizant of regional outliers. Why do we have an outlier in a region? Is that feature very popular in a region? Did we fail in a translation, localization, etc.? So that quarterly analysis cadence is really important to constantly make sure we're improving our content and providing relevant content to our customers. The fourth one is getting the right people in the bus. So I talked to you already about those skills that person has to have. And so here are some of the things when we go to the hiring side of things that we look at. So again, hiring is part of my strategy. So you might think I'm writing help content, so I want a technical writer, and in fact, I'm looking at marketing, PR, and communication background is actually being much more important than having a technical writer. And again, your organization may be different. In my organization, we're writing content mostly directly to consumers, and most of Yahoo products aren't overly complex. And so much more focus on this skill set versus, say, a technical writer is important, and we found much more effective. I'm also looking at people, they must have existing writing skills. I'm not teaching someone how to write. Of course, they need to be able to manage multiple projects. They have to be able to deal with ambiguity, and that passion for helping people. So my fifth anchor is sticking to our principles, so I'll really go to a deep dive in here as we talk about the 10 principles. But at a big level here, we have what we call writers' workshops. And so we want the same brand voice and the same experience regardless of who's writing. And so the writers' workshop and the peer-to-peer review really helps us achieve that. So writers' workshop, every month we get the writers together and we'll workshop different things, whether it's a change in a technique, whether it's improving skills, or maybe it's things that we've discovered in this peer-to-peer review. So the peer-to-peer review is where those writers, they critique each other's work, and this drives this consistency across our team between these two, writers workshop and peer-to-peer review. We're at a place right now where we can't afford a separate editor to look at every single piece of content that we've written, so hence that's what we try to accomplish through these two, writers workshop, the peer-to-peer review. And then finally the 10 content principles. So I'm going to dig into each one of these, but these are the kind of the standards that we hold our writers to. And so I've listed them all here, so you'll have them for later reference when you get the recording. But let me just dig into each of these individually. So the first one is knowing your audience, and this obviously I hope makes sense to you. But think of a persona. So if you were a Yahoo Mail user, that Yahoo Mail user could be your grandmother, or it could be, that grandmother's 10-year-old niece. So understand your persona, and also understand that the people coming to your website, they're only going to spend 10 or 20 seconds, and if they don't see this value proposition, they're leaving. And likewise, know your audience, that most of them are going to search, say, on Google, Bing, or Yahoo. They're not going to want to search in your website. So that's how they're actually going to reach you. So know your audience is that first principle. The second one is this notion of follow the scent. So most of your visitors, and this is going to come across all websites, not just Yahoo, If you continue to give them a scent or that notion that they're getting closer to their answer, they will click. They'll go through to that next step. And so you have this level of everything you do, wherever that customer enters your website, they must be able to follow the scent. And this is important to the next couple of principles of understanding this whole notion of follow the scent. The first one is easy to scan titles that promises what that article will be. So whether you're looking at a search result page, or maybe you have a page where someone's browsing through and they have several links on that page, that title must be easy to scan and it must mean something. And of course, when your customer clicks through, it better deliver what that title promised. So there's a couple different pieces of research. One says that when people look at search results or scan a page, they're only looking at the first 11 characters. So if that was the case, that prior screen would look more like this. So if I'm scanning this, I see sent email we, messages are, an email was, etc. Another piece of research suggests that they look at the first 3 to 5 words. So again, about getting that easy to scan title, you better front load that title with most important information. So let's assume we're looking at the first 3 to 5 words, and I'm looking about something about incorrect on my email. I may then scan or read the rest of this. So maybe now I'm looking at this block of information. So again, very important principle in everything we do. That title, front load it, understand people are going to scan results, and finally it better deliver what is promised. So finally, when you get to that article itself, now if you go to my website today, our design has recently changed, but the principles are the same. You should be able to scan it easily. So your title, headings, if you have the need for a caution or other information, numbered steps, all has to be easy to scan, because as we saw under the persona and knowing your customer, you've only got 10 or 20 seconds. Your customer needs to be able to scan that and easily find that information, and then that will determine whether they're going to read it for clarity and consumption and perhaps take action. And then support SEO in every way. So again, I talked about in the first principle, knowing your customer. Our customers are probably searching for us from Google, Bing, or Yahoo, and so we have to do everything we can to make all the content we write support SEO. So I'm on that same article page here, and I'm just pointing out where the H1s and H2s, etc., are important to SEO. The other thing that's really important is like your metadata and your URLs. So in this example at the top, I have the Aviate Help article, which is in English, but when we translate it for Vietnamese, all the same information is available, it's just in Vietnamese, and then the same thing applies to our URLs. So make sure your URLs are written in a way that Google and other search engines understand them so they know which region or locale they apply to.
Hey, Chris.
So again, yes?
So I have an SEO company. International SEO is one of the hardest things. Maybe talk a little bit more, or how do you handle international SEO?
That's a really good question. So the first part is, and I'll touch on this a little bit later, is using your translation and localization best practices. So when you are doing research on, let's say in my case, English, what is the right keywords, what is the customer language, that's my first step when I write my content in English. So I'm writing my content using the customer's language, not my internal terms. Well, likewise, when I work with my translation vendor, I should give them or we should work together to give them a dictionary of meaning.
Yeah.
So if I'm using the word learn how to troubleshoot in English, that translation in Vietnamese must also match the preferred words in Vietnamese. So that would be a key piece that's not obvious in what I've shown here. I don't know if that kind of addresses your question in terms of also I presented the URLs. So when I first arrived at Yahoo, we had parameterized URLs for each of the locales, and the search engines didn't recognize it. And so everything worked on just .com without the prefix. In this example, you can see AU, DE, or VN. And so Google and Bing and Yahoo didn't know how to interpret that as, oh, these are written for a specific locale. So to kind of, summarize that, make sure you have that dictionary, shared linguistic dictionary with your translation vendor, and then also make sure your URLs are locale specific, and that will gain you a whole bunch. Then I think the next step is, you got to really work with your regional partners to fine-tune further. All right?
Great.
So let me move on to the next one, brand voice. And so brand voice could be a dangerous one, of course, when we're going across different regions. So again, this is one where you may have to work with different regions if information you present one way is not going to be well interpreted in a different region. So in general terms, Yahoo's brand voice is things about being transparent, open, straightforward, to the point, which translates pretty well to different regions. It also is great for help content because I don't want to put a bunch of fluff in there. People don't want to read a bunch of fluff. They want you to get to the point. So when you talk about your own brand voice, you have to look and compare and contrast and make sure that what you're doing in your master language is not going to be a problem in other regions. Likewise, when you work with other regions, make sure any pushback you get is strictly a culture-based pushback and not an individual's preference. So I guess maybe that would be the biggest piece of advice I can give you when you work with all the different regions, is separate what's cultural differences versus an individual preference. So brand voice is principle number 6. Number 7, as I alluded to, the translation best practices. I threw up a couple poor translations here in the boxes. But if you think about what should you be doing for your translation best practices, and David, you can follow up here and add anything more you want. One idea per sentence. It works great for translations, and in fact, it also is great for people trying to read your content because it's much easier to read. Simplicity over creativity. So also think about, you could be just a US-based company and your target audience is US-based, but how many people in the US actually English is a second language? I can tell you that's probably quite a few. So even this principle applies to a fully US-based company with predominantly US-based customers. Reuse and consistency. So once you've figured out what are the right terms, your linguistic mappings, what have you, reuse and consistency not only saves you money, but then also you're certain that you're hitting the right terms all across the globe. Spend the time and get it right the first time. As we all know, there's a cost to providing translation localization. So put that effort up front to get it right the first time. Not only will your content work in its source language, but then also you're going to save that time and money when you're doing your translations. I've talked about the shared definitions, and then have a linguistic feedback process. So I have, internal colleagues throughout the world, and so we've established feedback process. So if I'm in Germany and I'm a support agent in Germany, or actually I could be any part of the Yahoo organization in our German office, and make sure we have a process so they can give us feedback. So this is critically important when you're first starting. Over time, hopefully you've gotten pretty good at it and you have less feedback, but you always need a feedback process. David, do you have more you want to add here?
Yeah, I mean, obviously these are, fantastic and right to the point. I would take it, from our side as a vendor, I would take it one step further and include relationships within the translation best practices. And what I mean by that is, the linguistic feedback, the sharing the definitions, the investment in spending the time to get it right that first time. These are all things that we take very seriously and should be. And one of the ways that we've found works best is to sort of have a much more transparent relationship between all the stakeholders at the customer side, as well as the stakeholders from the vendor side, and that means that it's important to be able to work together during the full localization process with the in-country reviewers. Yahoo is blessed with the fact that you probably have at least a few resources in each region that you can work with together with the translators. Some companies don't have that, but it's important for companies that are smaller, say, to work with their distributors in region through the process. And this process really begins before you translate. That what you call sharing definitions with the LSP, what we call that terminology. And that terminology has to begin. That terminology development has to begin from looking at the source, at the English, and identifying what are the terms and what are the definitions within the English. And that's an iterative process with the customer, with the consumer, where you really have to work together in order to develop that monolingual glossary. And there should be some back and forth. There should be communication between the LSP and the customer as to let's get the definitions down before we begin. After that, we have to look at how we develop that in the specific regions. And again, it's important to develop that relationship that says, okay, we're not treating translation as a commodity because we don't believe it is. We believe it's part of your business. So, we have to invest in training our people to understand your business. And the best way to do that is to really be completely transparent and say, look, your in-region people will speak with our linguists, and they'll spend that time getting it right the first time, even before the first time happens. So it's important to develop that relationship between the resources. And then as far as linguistic feedback process, you hit the nail on the head. That's sort of, you see that that graph that slopes down over time, and that's because you get the feedback at the beginning. You iron out the styles. You iron out everything that's preferences with the regions, and then you'll see that over time your process is going to be much smoother. And since you're going to have in place a mechanism that you'll be able to connect between your regions and your translators who just happen to come from the LSP, so that's going to give you the ability to really succeed and implement these best practices.
Great. So thank you, David. One of the things I wanted to kind of follow up with what you said in terms of training your translators on the products. In fact, when we send out content for translations, we separate it. So if I'm sending out a translation for Yahoo Mail versus help articles around our account management, we make sure we specify which properties, as we call them, that these are for, so we get the right translators connected. The other thing we do that I don't have here is we'll do screenshots. So if I'm just explaining a new feature in a product, here's what it looks like in English. Whether my content ends up having that screenshot or not, I'll include it out to our translators so they have more of a visual reference to go along with the text. All right, so we'll move on. Principle number 8, strategic use of video and images. And so this is just a great example how we used the little icons in product to bullet on the different features that we're reviewing or providing an overview. And like any kind of image or video, there can be a cost to translate in that. So we try to strategically use it, and we are not necessarily throwing images or videos just to fill space, but we're really thinking about and planning about it ahead of time. And so it takes additional work, and it doesn't come for free, but it's highly valuable, particularly like a product like Flickr, very visual. It's very important that we include images. So strategic use, and that in itself could be a whole nother discussion. And then in terms of content, generic markup, make sure it works in all the UIs. So I showed you at the very beginning where I'm supporting customers that are using the desktop or laptop to get help through the web browser. I have mobile, which may be a mobile website or it could be mobile apps. I have in-product help, and then I have agents getting help. And so I have 4 to 5 different UIs. And so I can't mark up my content to work in one UI. I have to mark it up so that then my designers can adjust using CSS. And so they will also give us some custom CSS classes, and then they'll make sure in each of the UIs the content displays appropriately. And as I also mentioned, we use some variables for local values, so we can make sure in certain cases when it's really important for individual locale to have specific information that is taken care of. So plain vanilla markup, I can't stress this one enough. If you're not doing this now, it's no time like right now to start doing this. The last one is make sure you're set up to get contributions from across the organization. So I already talked about linguistic feedback, but there's much more than that. There's like content recommendations. So in the help space, again, I talked about I have agents, but I also got product experts. There is no way any of my writers are going to know all things about a product. So we have to establish a very easy way to get feedback. And we've established communities on some intranets so that we can have conversations to get feedback for given properties. Have a process for emergent issues. Again, it may be an agent who finds a new problem, they've validated it, and maybe it's a weekend or holiday, and they shouldn't be restricted from posting new information because my team is off work or on vacation. And then urgent translations, kind of hand in hand with that emerging issue. If that issue comes out in France and they discover it, it's during their business day, we have to have a process so we can get perhaps urgent translations across the world. And a part of our process includes some follow-up after the fact, so we've addressed these other principles, but we're able to get that content out in an urgent fashion in case something comes up unexpectedly. So those are the 10 principles. It didn't happen overnight. These are something we've worked on over time, and it's the core to everything we do. And then on the strategy itself, I obviously left a lot out. As an example, I didn't tell you much about our collaboration with our development team, but we have, languages that expand. So if I'm writing something in English and it's going to show up in German, how is that going to behave on my web page? So there's a whole collaboration, also development in terms of our internal search engine. I didn't talk much about making sense of customer feedback, so what do I do with that? Or measuring conversion, taxonomy and metadata, user-generated content. So there is much more that we could potentially include in our strategy that I haven't addressed today. So I wanted to make sure we had time for questions, so that's why I kind of stopped it there. Chris, I'll hand it back over to you, and if you have any questions, perhaps you could facilitate that for us.
Well, we actually have a ton of questions. I'm glad we have time here. Actually, Chris, if you want to go to the next slide, so I don't have to take the ball back.
Yes, there we go.
Do this. All right, questions. Content strategy and localization. Yahoo's help content. Let me open the Q&A. Okay, quick question. Chris, how many localization vendors do you work with personally?
I personally work with an in-house team that outsources it. Now, off the top of my head, I think they're currently working with 3, but that can vary all the time. It may be when we add a new language, we're looking at a new vendor. There's various reasons. Right now, I think we're working with 3.
Okay, cool. How large is your localization team, and what are the roles? For example, project manager, localization engineer, internal translators. Tell us a little bit about your team. Who do you work with?
Yeah, so most of our translations are all done, by vendors, and so our internal team facilitates that process. They actually recently gave us a new tool where we have a much closer direct relationship with the translation providers, and so our internal people serves as project managers, helping us deal with, maybe an issue or planning for capacity if we have a big project. So I have on my staff 10 help writers, and the localization team, I think they have 6. So they're also kind of divided the way we divide up. Each writer has a certain set of properties, and likewise, they're divided as well.
Okay, cool. How do you deal with translations where you need translators to translate a wiki-based tool? Maybe David, maybe that's something you can also chime in. Well, Chris, if you want to first tackle it.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, I think on slide 7 about best practices, we try to get it right the first time. So we have moved away from a model of constant updates because of that cost and churn. So I don't know if anybody's on the phone is familiar with the methodology called KCS, Knowledge-Centered Support, which the basic principle is everybody can contribute knowledge, and as you find gaps and problems, you make those changes. The downside is, on the translation side, whether internally staffed or externally, you have constant time and money being spent to keep those translations up to date. So, in fact, we discourage that model just because of that effort to manage is just extremely difficult and extremely spendy.
Yeah. David?
I would say that, it goes to, really doesn't matter, how you're presenting that content. It matters what the content is. And, if the wiki is there for internal use, for instance, and you're adding, 2,000-3,000 words a day, well, just as Chris mentioned, that's a cost that your organization may not be willing to shoulder. So, the idea is, and Chris mentioned this earlier on, that you have to look at what's going on with your content, who's using it, who are your consumers of the content, how much are you going to invest in providing that content to a region that maybe is not profitable for you on one hand, or that you're not interested in providing service to because of the costs involved. We don't have the luxury of being able to provide every language and every piece of content into every language. There are alternatives. An alternative would be to be able to run that through machine translation if it's not if the content is for internal use and just for reference, that could be a solution. Again, it goes to examining who the content consumer is.
Okay, cool. Something both vendors and the customer deal with on a regular basis. How do you manage fast turnaround messaging requiring 1-hour post such as issue notification? Basically, Chris, how do you deal with urgent translation needs?
Right. I think right towards the end, my last principle, including internal people. So if it's so urgent, I need it today, I will take whoever I've got in the organization who's best set up to do this. They may not do this professionally. They may not provide the best translator. So I can do that. I've even in a pinch used that machine translation because we felt that was better than nothing.
Yeah.
But again, it's working with whether it's directly to the vendor or with our internal partners to plan. So whenever possible, plan so that we have kind of a rule of thumb in terms of normal turnaround time, and then we just work with them, hey, we were surprised by this. Can you, put us in front of the queue kind of stuff. So it's, in David's case, he talked about having relationships. It's all about having those relationships, whether it is with our vendor doing the work or internal people to handle things in an emergency.
Absolutely. I remember, and David, before I hand it over to you, when I used to work in localization, because I'm from Switzerland, I speak German, very frequently, I was not a translator, I was a PM, project manager, sales, marketing. I very frequently ended up translating like last minute things that had to be done right away. David, how does Net-Translators handle last second requests?
Okay, so as a policy, we actually we don't allow, even though we have at least a dozen languages spoken as native languages by our team, we don't allow anybody who's in-house to translate. Rather, we set up a methodology where, and this goes again exactly what Chris said, it is about a relationship. So if you have a situation where you know you're a consumer of urgent translations all the time, so we could set up, and we've had customers with 20 or 30 requests a day going into different languages. And if you could set that up in such a way that all your resources are and backup resources are always in place for those 30, 40, 100 words, that that they're in place and they're expecting it, and they can do it a good and obviously urgent translation may not go through the full process of TEP, translation, editing, and proofreading, because it is so urgent. But if you're set up ahead of time and you have your teams in place and you have a relationship that, when we get a new customer calling into us and say, listen, I've got these, I've got this document of 3,000 words and we're always using, such and such company, but we need this turned around in a day. We say, well, no, thank you very much. That's not possible. We don't have a relationship with them. We don't have the ability to provide the same kind of quality that would be expected. So, it's all about, the urgency is all about having in place the right team that knows how to expect those urgent translations.
Yeah. All right. Cool. By the way, I encourage, feel free to continue to submit questions. We have a lot of questions. We may not get through all of them. But I'm scanning sort of like what's already been answered and not. Let's see. Chris, what authoring tool do you use? Do you require that all authors use it? And why did you choose that tool?
Excellent question. So first, understand I'm pretty tool agnostic, meaning I'll tell you who I'm using today, but that doesn't necessarily mean that's the right tool for you. And we always evaluate vendors. So currently our platform is Oracle Knowledge. It used to be Inquira. And so all of my team, so the direct team that releases content, and there's a few people outside our team, but they are all required to use that tool. But because, as I talked about, we have a community of where people can recommend and submit information, the rest of the organization doesn't have to know our tool set at all. That internal tool currently for the community is Jive. And so if you know how to post on a blog and things of that nature, that's all you need to know. So if you know how to write in Word or write an email, you can do that. And so we've tried to really lower that barrier. And so what we try to push from the folks that are submitting content to us is, you should be coming to us because you're a subject matter expert. You know the product. We will take care of things like brand voice, writing concisely, taking care of the translation and localization process, and knowing our tool set.
Great.
So that's kind of how we separate the two.
Okay, cool. Could you recommend some glossary with terms or expressions related to apps translations? Can you recommend some glossary, a glossary term? Are there any glossaries available out there? I know Microsoft, they have a localized glossary available. Are you using any of those available?
We have our internal glossary that's been developed over time, so I don't, maybe David have some better answers, but because we have our internal glossaries defined already and then we continue to work off that, we're not going to third parties.
Yeah. David?
Yeah, actually, there are some glossaries available, sort of generic glossaries. The Apple Gloss is available for reference to how things are called in iOS, for instance, and that's pretty helpful. There are some Android glossaries out there. I don't remember a specific one. But there are some generic glossaries available. Naturally, you have to have your own glossary. You know, if you're going to use somebody else's glossary exclusively, then you know what's the point of your business? You have some sort of a value proposition, so you're going to have some sort of unique terminology that you'll want to make sure that it's maintained across all languages. So you know you can't get away. You can use some generic glossaries, Microsoft glossaries, for instance, for you know for technology in general. But if you're not maintaining your own terminology, you're just resting on that, then you know then you're not doing an effective job.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's see. Does Yahoo have different vendors for different languages for the localization translation process, or does it have a single vendor that sources all? I think you already sort of addressed this.
Yeah, so you know, let me just kind of follow up. So I think I said I believe we're currently with 3 vendors, and it covers 2 things. One is because of the different languages, and some is based on capacity, right?
Yeah.
So that's the 2 reasons. You know, and again, these vendors are not just for me, though I'm probably one of their biggest customers, but our product teams use the same vendors as well. As is the glossaries, back to the glossary question, and hence when we have, like I said, internal glossaries, a lot of the terms are first driven by the product team even before they get to me. And that's why it's really important for us to have that common internal glossary. And you know, once upon a time when we first start building iOS apps or Android apps, we probably, you know, went to Apple and Google to get some guidance on that, but you know, it becomes our own.
Okay, great. Do you use a localization management platform?
So our platform is homegrown. We have, you know, one to manage our machine translations, you know, so we get the reuse effectiveness, and then also we have now a front end where I mentioned, I think before, we do much more of the work ourselves, and but it's a homegrown system, so I don't have, you know, anything I could recommend as a tool.
Okay.
You know, we got the advantage, we're big enough, right? So, and we've been doing this for many, many years.
Yeah.
So we've been able to improve our internal tools.
Absolutely. Quick question to follow up. Can you give an example of plain vanilla markup versus more complex markup? It was a slide, sort of like in the middle.
Yes, yes. So think about, if you're, easy way for me to explain it is if you think about HTML, if you use plain HTML, you're going to use a paragraph tag, a bold tag, maybe even a table, but you're not going to use any inline style sheets, or you're not going to put a style sheet in for a given article or piece of content. So if I want certain behaviors, such as we have something we call hide, show, or twisty, where the content by default is hidden, customer needs to click on it, expands, our designers give us a class, and so we use that class name, and then the designers make sure that hide, show feature works appropriately on each different UI. So anytime they introduce, or we want a new, you know, feature, we go back to the designer and say we want this feature. They make sure to work in all UIs, and they'll give us a class. But otherwise, it's the big, you know, the message takeaway, I guess, would be no inline styles, or, you know, in older HTML, you used to be able to do things like set hard value on, say, a color or a width or something. And you want to avoid that, because the first time one of those UIs, they've done a design change, maybe it's color palette, maybe it's making it wider or something of that, then you're going to have to go back and retouch all of your content.
Yeah, great. Can you tell a little bit more about the process of image localization that you talked about?
Yeah, that's a great question. So what we do, so a couple people on my team, that is their focus. So while I talked about I have all these writers, I have some people specific to manage images and videos. Most cases, and there are some exceptions, but most cases we will start off with an English image in every place, just like we, you know, our content starts in English. So we use the token or that replacement value, so then we can go to a specialist who can, in essence, get that screenshot in every single different UI. So if I'm talking about Yahoo Mail, I have a, you know, pseudo user account for every single language. So if I'm trying to show you, you know, folders are on the left, the settings is in the upper right, and then we want localized text, then we'll go into each language and, do that screenshot. And so the key there is have someone dedicated to that work, and then have like I said, a token or a replacement variable so that you don't have to go retouch the content. So the way our tokens work is anytime that content is served, I don't know, let's say French, it'll look for that token value in French. But if that same content is served in German, it's going to look for the value in German. So
Great.
Is that enough information? Did you follow that, Chris?
Yes. I mean, that's a interesting topic. Probably could be its own little webinar. But yeah. Then a question about your internal communication process. Like, how do you communicate internally at Yahoo? Is it just by email? Like, how do you communicate with your team?
D, all of the above. So I talked about, for my own team, we have peer-to-peer reviews and we have writers' workshop. So not all of my teams locate the same place, but a big portion of it, but we just do virtual meetings. When it comes to talking externally to our organizations, if we have significant changes, we have a process to make sure everybody gets notified. We call it a RFS, a request for service. So that process is in place. And then we have the communities I talked about. So I have a very specific sub-community for every property we provide support. And we've gone through and essentially marketed that and encouraged each of the different organizations to come speak to us in that community forum. And so it wouldn't be unusual if we get an email from someone who will say, you know what, here's your answer, but I've written it on our community platform and pointed them to it. So also teach them to use that platform.
Cool.
So, it's that relationship piece in terms of you're forcing that relationship and to communicate in a certain manner. So it takes a little bit of work, right? But what good relationship doesn't?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we're actually approaching the top of the hour. We have so many more questions. I do apologize. We're not going to get to all of them. I'm going to bundle a couple of questions into one question, and then if both of you, Chris and David, could give like a last conclusion. Maybe we can do sort of do a part 2 of this sometime in the future. Chris, does your community in Yahoo, the help community, work in conjunction with other internal Yahoo communities? Do you talk with them about localization translation? And do you sim ship or English and localized languages?
Ask me that second part again.
Do you, after the English has been authored, like how long does it take for you to release the localized versions?
Okay.
Yeah.
So let me answer that one first. Our goal is to release it all at the same time. So it will vary by product. Like if we're going to introduce a new product feature, sometimes that release cycle is different. We just got to follow the release cycle. Sometimes it's globally worldwide, and so the objective is to release it all at the same time. And so it goes back to our prior conversation. What is my expected lead time I need with my translation partners, and make sure we plan accordingly. So it's just all about planning. Hence, my writer needs that project management skill.
Okay.
On the working with other organizations, we probably work mostly, we work definitely closely with our product teams and with our social team. And the social team right now is predominantly English only, so we're more working to make sure they are connected with our content and socializing that, so to speak. On the partner or on the product side, it could be from that shared glossary to schedules, but yeah, so we definitely work with those teams predominantly. And then if you remember that circle I had, if you go look at this recording later, I have my writer in the middle, and there was about a dozen different groups we work with. And so, building relationships with those as much as possible. Again, get them to use the community space so it's a much more open forum. And it's really been working well for us.
Awesome. Hey, Chris, could you go to the last slide? Then we're going to conclude this session. We're actually at the top of the hour. Before I hand it back to you guys for a quick conclusion, I'd like to thank everybody for their interest. We're we could have made this probably like an hour and a half webinar. So Chris, maybe if you're up for it sometime in the future, we'll come up with another webinar.
Sure.
I'm going to hand it over to, why don't we do David, quick conclusion about help localization from the vendor standpoint.
Well, I'm actually going to take this opportunity to thank Chris, both Chris's, for arranging this and really, taking so much time to prepare this and to help out everybody who signed up for this webinar, and everyone's going to benefit from it going forward since it's being recorded. So, fantastic. Thanks a lot, Chris. And look forward to hearing more from you guys.
Great. Chris, one last word.
I would just say, if you got more questions, to the best of my ability, if you want to connect on LinkedIn and ask me questions that way, or set up a follow-up discussion, I'll do my best to accommodate that. Okay.
I mean, you're a busy man. I so much appreciate you making the time to host this webinar with us today. That said, Chris and David, thanks again. Everybody, thanks a lot for your interest, and we'll see you next time. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.